Hey everybody, welcome back to this week's live stream. One second here, I'm going to turn this to dark mode. See if that helps my lighting a little bit. So, hopefully everybody's doing well today. It's another exciting week in Paradise here. We're going on our 6th week now of trying to design a game together. And so we're going to kind of just continue to deep dive, this week into this new superhero game. And, please, everybody, this is kind of a discussion, brainstorming session that we're all working together. And I recognize it's a little harder for you guys to chime in on text, but please do. Again, this is kind of for us to design something together. But we're trying to kind of dive into the meat now and really kind of do the design work. For those of you that, if this is your first time watching this, I definitely recommend going back and watching the previous series, or even the previous article or the previous series on world building as well, which this is building on top of. But really this is about, how do we sit down and build the nuts and bolts, of a game. And so, in the previous weeks, we really were doing a lot of ideation and just really kind of brainstorming and kind of coming up with random stuff and figuring out which way it went. And again, we're doing this pretty fast and pretty dirty right now. In other words, I'm not doing this in the same time frame that I would do as a normal professional designer. I'm cutting corners to kind of give you guys a glimpse behind the curtain, but I'm not trying to necessarily spend the same amount of time that I would spend on everything, here. And so, as an example, like in the brainstorming section when I'm looking at competition, here we did that in maybe 30 minutes. In real life, I would probably spend days or weeks doing that, maybe even more sometimes. And so I just want you to kind of understand that this isn't the perfect, scenario. You can't watch this and expect that you're also going to design a game in a few hours. So I'm making sometimes some arbitrary decisions and making stuff just to keep it moving along to kind of give you a glimpse of what the whole process is like. But keep in mind, we're kind of doing a segment of each one. We're doing a fragment kind of each one. So first of all, hey everybody. So let's see, Jonathan, good to see you as always. I'm going to try to pronounce your name of Dugakin. So very, very apologize for, I'm sure I botched your name completely. So, much apologies for that. And then, DeLong, how's it going? And Big Glob, good to see you again as always. So again, welcome back everybody. And if you're a first time, either with my channel or stuff, cause I definitely don't, thanks there. For those of us that, if you're new here and stuff, again, please, we've hit now, I think it's about 70 hours of content, on my channel just for my segment alone, not to mention all the other CG Spectrum stuff. So if you're into game design, if you're into game development, please go back and check out my other videos. I've been doing this for quite a while now. And so I think this is what even like my 33rd show or 34th show. Actually, I misnumbered that one. I think this is 34th show. So, anyway, so bear with me. This is a hard show to do. 2 hours of me rambling. So, oh, hey, Dawn. We'll do our best to kind of work through this in real time, and stuff. It's always, I'm finding this as a game designer, a very unique challenge. I've never had to design in this way where I'm kind of designing and other people are kind of over your shoulder, so to speak. And I'm trying to explain what I'm doing while I'm doing it. So bear with me. This is definitely a new experience for me as well. We'll do our best to design this together. So, let's get started. I want to keep diving in. I mean, I really want to start, moving from kind of the dreaming and the ideation kind of stuff into a bit more of like, how do we do it, right? So, last week we started off talking about the pillars of the game, and we started to define what these pillars were. And so I want to go back and try to finish the pillars today. And if we have time, then we'll move on to kind of key features and trying to define, a lot of the key features and start using systemic design principles for that. And if you guys don't know what that is, and you're not familiar with what I call systemic design, please go back and watch. I had a video quite a few weeks ago called Systemic Design, and that'll kind of tell you about, it's just breaking things down into features, basically breaking things down into their logical parts, into their gameplay systems. And you'd be surprised at like how the game, not to say designs itself, but a lot of things really start to flow when you really understand that, a game or a specific genre of game has a lot of needs, and it has a lot of different things that are there. So let's dive in a little bit. And again, please, everybody, raise your hand, throw out ideas. If you've got ideas, if you've got questions, if you're not sure what I'm doing, please, holler at me. We'll do our best to get through this, and I will try to occasionally explain the method to my madness and why I do certain things. So let me reiterate on the core pillars and why they're important. And I think, I'll say this a million times in my course and to people, and I think they don't quite always get the how critical it is to me and to many people, especially publishers and other, executive types, that you really have to understand what the core of the game is, right? And to reiterate from last week, that the core of that game isn't necessarily, like I used the example last week of movement. So if you just have a standard movement system that like everybody else has done, or that the previous games have done, or something like that, then I wouldn't consider that the movement would not be a core pillar. It's a core feature, and it is something that might be critical to the game, and it could be something that I'm doing, second to second in the game. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a new, innovative core thing, that game is going to be, right? And so, but it could be. So I used the example last week, if you were going to do a parkour game. And so, if you were doing a really advanced, like Mirror's Edge kind of game, or, Assassin's Creed or something like that, with a super advanced movement system that nobody had really seen, then that movement system with its supporting, features would be something that would definitely be, innovative and be kind of part of your core pillars. And so, or for example, another example from one of my games was Rainbow Six Vegas. And so Rainbow Six Vegas was actually one of the first games to really have a true cover system. And so it was one of the games that kind of helped originate, all the cover-based systems and things like that ultimately also got used by Gears of War and some other, games that kind of spawned that whole cover shooter, kind of mentality. So in that sense, the cover system was a unique movement mechanic. And so that was something that was kind of a core pillar to us, was having innovative team-based movements and things like that. And so we had a lot of features that were movement for 3 players, because you had yourself and the 2 AIs with you, and innovative things you could do there. And we also had a repelling system that you could repel up and down buildings. You could flip upside down and like shoot when you're upside down, like through windows and and stuff like that. So we did have a number of very innovative mechanics for the time, especially back in like 2004 when I started the design of that game. No games at that time had any of those systems really implemented in any significant way. And so those were very core pillars to what we were trying to build in Rainbow Six. And so just understand that that pillars really are something that needs to be supported, and be innovative and really key to the game. And then, you want to try to get where 80, 90%, even 100% of all of your game, besides the foundational genre-based stuff, is really in your core pillars. And it helps you kind of focus the game, and helps you kind of understand, like, okay, so for example, if we had this list here and we wanted to do first-person martial arts, right? And you might say like, well, martial arts and innovative combat, isn't on my list. Then, doing another pillar or another really big feature probably is not the smartest thing to do. If you have more than 3 or 5 really, really big things, then you have to be careful about how much new stuff you're doing. And so that doesn't mean you can't do 6 or 8, but you have to start questioning yourself about, is the game too big? Is it too much, right? And are these really truly core pillars to the game? All right, so last week we talked about the 4 pillars of being, technology, battles, bases, and teams. And so, and we did some linking and embedding to kind of show, kind of where these things are, and in the document. We haven't filled these out, fully here. And I realized after the fact that we really had a 5th pillar that I'm going to bring in for now. And again, some of these we may talk ourselves out of. Right now, we're still brainstorming. So we can still, sort of question whether these things are real pillars or not, whether these things are going to be even features in the game or not. And so we kind of need to question this stuff and kind of understand, are these things that, we really need, are these things that we really want to have in the game and not. And so let me look for, I know that we had put a section here. I'm looking for, so there was teams, here was superheroes. But we also had the player character. So maybe what I'll do is move, again, I move things around a lot. So I'm going to cut this out here. And I'm going to paste it down to here. So let's see. So superheroes, and I'm actually going to take the player character. I have it as heading 2. Again, I'll move it to heading 3. For those of you that don't know, like I like to use the headings here to make for easier navigation. I actually had planned to. I was going to reorganize this whole doc before this talk today, and I didn't get a chance because it's as we're moving through this, we're kind of randomly putting a lot of things in a lot of random places. So this document's kind of disjointed a little bit right now. We're not going to get OCD and reorganize it today. I'll try to do that before our next conversation next week. But that's the nature of design documents, is that you do your best to organize things, and then you often just kind of need to stop and like organize things and put stuff into appendixes or other things if you know that they're stuff that you're not going to use. And so another tip that I'll tell you guys too that I often do is using color. So one of the things, if you write a full document like this, one of the things that gets really tricky over time is that quite often it's really hard to figure out like what have you worked on recently, and then especially when you have multiple people working on a document and commenting and other things, that can get a little bit tricky as well. So just as another little kind of hint for writing, and again, the process for how you design these things can sometimes be important. What you can do is, let me look for something here that I don't like. Let's see here. So the enemies here, I'm actually going to move this into, this is something else. So let's move enemies to another section. So again, I'm always kind of, reorganizing things and kind of trying to figure out, what makes sense here, right? But what I was trying to show you. So missions and objectives would be another one. I don't want to do too much of this, but I just kind of showing you guys. And I'll put sidekicks down here. Just So let's just say for now that like sidekicks was a feature that we determined, through our brainstorming session that it just wasn't part of the core pillars. It didn't quite, make the cut. Like it might be okay. Like it might be a good idea. It might be something there that's all right. So one of the things I'll do is, I can move it, or actually recolor it sometimes to something where if I'm not sure about it, where I'm gonna well, maybe I'll cut it, maybe I won't. I personally will change the colors. That's so weird. It shows it's cornflower brew. Huh. It's really strange how the names, for some reason, I don't know why, you guys can maybe see that the name of the color is totally wrong in this. I have no idea what's causing that. Maybe it's the black mode, dark mode screwing it up. But that one just threw me off. I was like, orange is not, was it cornflower blue? So, anyways, good thing I'm not colorblind-ish. So I'll put things like an orange to kind of signify like, hey, this is something I need to come back to and something I need to kind of think through. And it's probably like it's on the cutting table, but it hasn't been cut yet, right? And then I might come in, to something else and say like, okay, I'm just going to use this. Not that we're cutting this right now, but I could say base attacking and defending. Like, great idea, but out of scope for what we're doing. It doesn't fit in our core pillars. And so I would then come in and make that red. And so, again, these are ways for me as I'm moving through a document, I can quite often see really quickly, like, because I don't want to lose these ideas because sometimes I might come back and want them again, and things. And so eventually I might move the red ideas into an appendix or into another brainstorming document, to kind of keep them with me, and stuff. But these are again kind of just ways of doing that. And then another thing that I'll occasionally do is as I start to put in new features as well, like if I came into this large scale battle, let's just say I just now wrote this and this document's been around for a while. Something else I'll often do is put these in blue or some kind of a bluish color is what I usually use. I think what looks good against this black because I'm doing the inverted colors right now. So maybe a little bit lighter there. Okay, and so my personal use of this is that I will color stuff blue that I know is new, and then eventually, if I've done a pass or two, then I might take all the blue stuff and turn it white again to signify that it's been in there for a while. And yes, you can use revision history and things within Google Documents to go back and do some of that. But again, it's a quick way to find information, right? So that's what that's all about. And all right, so oops, I'm gonna turn that white again. All right, so let's go back to our core pillars here. And actually, I want to make these headings 3. Again, I'm being purposely a little bit OCD here, just so that you guys can kind of see the process. But I like that I now have them showing up here. That I can see them under this whole thing, and so it's just another way for me to organize stuff. And then there's things like team somehow here got that should be a heading 2, I guess. Okay. And anyways, I'm not going to get too OCD, but yeah, asteroids was something we were talking about but never did. So that could be something that's just more down here. So all right, little housekeeping. But the point of that was that I wanted to have, and why I started to kind of do this when I was double checking here is that this large scale battles here, because it's because it's one of my core pillars, I wanted to make sure that it showed up and just kind of so that it deserved, if it's a pillar, to me, it kind of deserved its own section. And so I wanted to make sure that it kind of had the stuff there. So each one of these, superheroes needs a link to where it was. Let's see here. I think we had that down here. Oh, wait. Oh, that's up there. Let me move this really quick. Again, I'm being a little OCD here. But I'm going to move this above. Because I want to start with, and then I'm going to move. Okay. All right. So part of what I'm trying to do here is that I'm trying to move each of these so that each of these core pillars basically has, its section. So I have advanced technology here, and now I determine that's kind of a pillar. So, and then bases and base building here. And so what I'm going to do is move those out into this section. This is just to help me kind of find everything as we're moving through it here. Bases and base building. Some advanced technologies here. I'm not going to clean this up too much. Oh, I'm not going to bother cleaning that up. So, let's see. Oh, and then here's teams. Okay. I think that's most of them there. All right. So hopefully that's kind of making sense to you guys. Just a little bit of some housekeeping there, And again, part of this is capturing everything and just trying to make sure that we don't lose it. But we have to kind of go back and forth. And so right now, again, one last just point is you'll see like how much text is on my screen right now. I'm working with a single screen, and I have it blown up as much as I can, just so that you guys can have a hopefully decent view of the text and can kind of read it. Now, normally when I work, for me, I've got a very large monitor in front of me, 43 inches, and it's enough that I can do two or three documents basically side by side. And so what I'll actually do in my work methodology, that's why I usually always use an ultra wide. I really, really, really highly recommend a minimum of like a 32 or 34 inch screen. I know it sounds silly, or at least a dual monitor setup of 227s if you're going to do game design. And that's kind of the bare minimum. And the reason being is that, you want to be able to have multiple documents open simultaneously. And so you're seeing me flip through the pages and scrolling up and down a lot more and doing that stuff than I normally would. Normally I'd have a much bigger document that zoomed out a little bit more, especially with my big screens. I got 2 or 3 of these all simultaneously. And even if it's the same document, I'll have, one page on like one part of the document and another page on another part of the document. I literally will be flipping back and forth between them as I work. And so, having even another screen up on another monitor or whatever that's, like an article or a YouTube video or whatever I'm using for some reference, might also be up there, as well. And so again, keep in mind for your process that you want to be able to have this stuff as easily accessible as you can. And the more that you have to kind of flip around. So if you're seeing me flip around a lot right now, that's why. This is not necessarily normally the way I would do it. Okay, so let me find the superheroes here. Okay, and then one last thing is insert the bookmark. You guys probably remember me doing that before. And then here, we're going to insert the link, bookmarks, superheroes. All right, so this kind of gives us the ability now to very quickly. Again, I'm showing you again that other process, as you remember, to link and embed a lot of things between a lot of different documents. Link and embedding, between either multiple documents, and multiple things, or, Excel or spreadsheet type views with this document. But these things should be living documents. I insert links to YouTube videos and, that kind of stuff all in here all the time. And so there's that kind of stuff you need to be sort of aware of, in that process of what you're, of how you're designing, right? So kind of keep that in mind. All right. So I'm not going to get, and we're not going to necessarily go through in these core pillars right now and nail every single one of these perfectly. Like, again, this is a process that once I've kind of identified the core pillars, which could take me, we did this last week in kind of an hour or whatever it was to get kind of halfway through this. This normal process could take days, right? This is not like an easy thing. It's not a trivial thing. Jonathan, you can attest to this. You're going through this right now with your game. It's a lot of back and forth, a lot of things that, you think are going to be like, oh, here, this is a core pillar. And then you're like, oh yeah, that's really just a kind of a feature, right? And that's not necessarily something that's core and innovative, and really a selling point. We also, I'll put in a term here. So you also hear another term that can be more from the marketing world or things like that, called the key selling point, or KSP for short. And so the pillars and the KSPs are kind of the same thing. Some people get them confused, intermixed. I'd actually argue that the pillars are more core to what the game design is, but it isn't necessarily, the features that you would, like on what we call on the back of a box, literally go through and list out, right? But they're related, and I want you to kind of think about them in the same way. I want you to think about like how and what is going to sell this game, right? Because this is, again, we're being, for lack of a better definition, we're being used car salesmen right now, and we have to be a little slimy in that, we are trying to sell something right now, and we are trying to cohesively put together a vision for our team and articulate it in such a way that everybody's on the same page. But at the same end, this does need to be a little sexy. This does need to sound good, and this needs to sound exciting. And we really want to make this kind of short. This is not this. These core pillars is a page or two at most kind of thing. This is not a big long, super drawn out thing. This is something that again is designed to articulate what you want to do very quickly. And if you get into a meeting and somebody says, hey, what are you building? Right? And then it's really easy to pull this up and say like, oh, okay, well, I'm building this that has superheroes, technology, battles, bases, and teams. Let me understand that. And you'll see I'm using single words or a couple words. I'm putting in things that are easy to understand, things that even don't even need necessarily a lot of explanation. So that's where you really, really win. If you can create concepts here that I could probably have these names alone and not even necessarily have supporting points underneath them. And, and people would be like, oh, okay, I get it. Like, or they get the core of what it is, right? So let me put in here, and again, these are not necessarily things that are like story points and stuff like that. And so you're not trying, this is not about selling the universe, the world, these kind of things. This is the gameplay. This is what the game is. And so when you talk about superheroes, this is not like, we're talking about conceptually, like what makes these superheroes unique, right? So now some of this, like the superheroes, I would argue that we haven't designed them deeply enough yet to know this. And the problem with this exercise is that this exercise, when it's all said and done, you could look at this thing and let's just say it's one page, right? You could look at this and show it to your boss, show it to somebody else. They look at it and just see one page of information, and therefore they assume that you spent an hour on it because, that's all it should have taken, right? To write one page or whatever, just saying, or a couple hours on it. And in their mind, that's all it should have taken. When, in reality, the core pillars could take me weeks, and sometimes even a little more than that, and I may even be changing them as I go, over 6 months. They don't always stay 100% locked. I mean, sometimes they are stuff that we realize we guessed wrong, in our paper design. So again, when you're seeing me here doing this and stuff, the reason why it's not necessarily that putting these words on paper is what's complicated. What's really hard is you have to know, again, I talked about this funnel, you have to know what the big game is, and you got to be able to funnel it down to a few choice words. You're not going all the way down to like, the one sentence, like vision statement or something where you're trying to define this whole thing, but you're trying to kind of get down to a point where you're saying, here's the core of the game, and here's where it is. But if you don't know what the whole big picture of the game is, then how do you know what this is, right? And so you can kind of do bottom up or top down, but it's really hard, I find. I mean, you can kind of work both ways, and if you guys don't know the ideation of where kind of the bottom up versus top down, right? So you could sit down and just try to like pull a bunch of random pillars from nowhere, right? And just kind of go like, okay, here's my foundation, here's my pillars, and now let me try to design a game around that, right? And you sometimes can succeed if you've got experience and kind of know what that needs to be. Or you can try to design a rough shell of a game and understand what that game is, and then see what trickles down to be like maybe kind of important, and see what trickles down after that to be really what's the heart of the game. And then from there you can write your core pillars. But that's generally a better way to go than just trying to like, again, do the bottom up where you're kind of saying, first, here's some random pillars that I think are great. And you might end up doing a little bit of both. You might know two of your pillars, and then you might have to figure out the other two, right? Or whatever it is. So again, it just depends on certain things are going to make sense to you right away, and other things won't. So for each of these pillars, let's try to work on now the supporting statements. And again, these don't need to be long drawn out, things that are, let's say, like incredibly long sentences or paragraphs or whatever. Now, that also one last thing about process, just so you guys know, like it's okay to write things out in really long form. Again, simplicity, especially like about like Apple simplicity, like is actually the hardest thing to ever do. So the simpler something is, the harder it is to design. And so it's really easy sometimes to write out a big blah, and you go, here's this big idea, and I just kind of like, whether that's a paragraph or a page or whatever, you just kind of get it out of your head, you throw it on paper, and it sticks for a little bit, and you're like, okay, it kind of works. Okay, now let me go simplify it, right? That initial like blob could have been your initial thought that took you, 10 minutes to get out, and then trying to simplify it down to like that perfect couple word summary or a sentence or whatever could sometimes take hours or days, and stuff. So don't, again, because something looks short and easy, like when you see a final pitch deck, when you see somebody's final core pillars or whatever, again, don't just look at like a one-page thing and think that it was really easy to do. It's way, way, way harder to write something that's very simplified. So keep that in mind. And the reason I keep reiterating this is I don't want you to beat yourself up when you realize like this is really hard. like being a game designer is really bloody hard, and trying to make really simple, really elegant design. And I bring up Apple, and they have a company called Frog Design that they work with a lot, that does a lot of their hardware design, and then their interfaces and things like that. When you create really elegant, simple designs, whether it's in interfaces, whether it's just in design in general, any kind of product design, game design, whatever, that those really simple designs can be 10 times harder to make. And so don't get upset if you're like, oh my God, I just spent like a week on this, and I must be stupid because it took me so long to do. And the reality is that's not always the case. And sometimes just, again, simplifying can be like way harder than you realize. All right, so I'm going to, in the spirit of that, I'm going to throw out some really fast, rough ideas of what these things would be. And I'm not going to worry right now about going back and trying to make these perfect. And so, in the perfect world, I would probably spend, again, a day probably on this, to really get this right, to really think through everything and stuff. And so this process is a little bit challenging. And so, and on each one of these, if you guys have ideas for these supporting statements, again, this is a conversation. Everybody, wake up. It's time to go to work, and let's try to get some stuff put down here. So I'll apologize if I'm typing and talking and getting confused and kind of doing both. I'm still learning to multitask while as I type and talk. So, all right. So superheroes. So highly customizable. So basically, we talked a little bit, the last couple weeks about kind of the superheroes and where they came from, and things like that. I'm not worrying right now about that exact point, but I want to make sure that it comes across that these are not going to be in my mind right now. And again, all of this is subject to change. That all of this stuff, that I want to create are customizable superheroes, and these are going to be a unique universe. And again, I don't need to say that here, because it's not about the world. So it's not a pillar to say like new original universe or things like that. That's outside the scope of what this key selling point is. Eventually, maybe as a key selling point, you might bring that up, that this is not Marvel, not DC or whatever, but the point is that I want to create, my idea, at least in my mind, is to create some default low-level heroes that have a name, and you would go through the world and you'd find them and hire them or get them to help you or whatever it is. They're going to join your team. And so and this is kind of right here is like, trying to think of the right word. I'll use the word operates, I guess, would be yeah, I don't want to get into the story there. So, player operates a team of superheroes. I don't like this because, again, it's getting into story and stuff too much. But that's okay because that does relate a little bit to the gameplay. And I'm actually going to move teams again, just organizationally here, because the teams and the superheroes are kind of linked together. Now, this is a so in this particular case, just sucks having OCD sometimes where you want to get it all right. So in this particular case, and I'm leaving this as it is right now, because I'm not sure about it. So in my mind right now, I don't know if this is the right choice. Right now, I have superheroes and teams in 2 buckets, in 2 pillars. In the back of my mind, they're related. And so, so ultimately, under superheroes, I might make the choice to say, like, you know what? Teams really is just part of superheroes. Like, I've got a bunch of superheroes, and I can group them together and make them a team, and that's all I need to say about that. So this is one of those cases where, you know, I will flesh each one out as kind of its own pillar, but then I'm going to kind of reevaluate it and kind of go like, well, you know, is that really the pillar? Or is that, you know, are these 2 things pillars, or should I just make it one, you know, one little bit bigger pillar there, right? So I want you guys to kind of see how we don't always know what's what. We don't always know which things are going to, you know, are going to be relevant, right? So hopefully that that makes sense there. Okay. So back to superheroes. All right. Trying to think what the... And then I can always come back down to here and say, like, you know... now something else... So something else I would recommend here, I'm going to put this, again, some of this I'm doing a little CD to again, kind of help you guys think about this. So another suggestion here when you're creating these pillars is, again, 1 word or 2 words, or just, you know, even 3, but just like a really short thing here that is basically kind of like a header, you know. And so what I'll often do is, again, if somebody is scanning these things and they're looking at this, and they can go like, oh, superheroes are customizable, you know, so I might say like unique powers, you know. So again, it doesn't have to be 1 word, but again, just, you know, it allows somebody who's coming in to read this thing to scan it very quickly and just see like, oh, okay, like now I get it. Now I understand like what, you know, what you're trying to do, you know, kind of thing. And so the, you know, so you also want to do things. This is 18. I'm going to put these up to, another thing just to keep in mind is typical like formatting and headers and stuff like that. You generally want to have, you know, big to small, right? So that people kind of understand what the hierarchies of these things, you know, are, right? And so again, I'm not going to go through and do the whole thing, but you kind of get the idea that you want to see and know, like, okay, superheroes, boom, you know, teams, boom, you know, customizable, unique powers, right? And so, you know, however you're structuring it, but you're trying to give people a very, very, very high level overview of what the game is going to be as quickly as possible, right? And, you know, in the case of unique powers, maybe I'll come back and fill that in later, right? But I'm just kind of, again, brainstorming this first pass of what these things are. And let's see here. Trying to think of the other gameplay that we would want to, that's worth mentioning here. And so what I'm looking for is to say like, oh, oops. Um, so I'm going to put that under teams because that's really more of a team feature about, you know, how big the team can be, right? So just kind of, you know, and so let's see, what do we call the, trying to think of the, that's not the right word, configuration. So maybe this is more like team building. So the large team of superheroes. All right, so you know so their superheroes are customizable. They got unique powers. The team building, you know, so you can basically build that team over time. So there's a collection, you know, mechanic there, and that you know that the player can operate what I'm calling a squad right now, whatever we want to call that. Squad maybe not be the best term. Typically in military terminology, a squad is 12 man. But whatever you want to call them that fits your mythos, you know, whatever, doesn't matter. But that's just kind of, again, trying to be really, really clear that not that this is the most innovative feature in the world, but we're trying to kind of balance that out. But in this case, again, like squads and team building, what I was trying to differentiate here is you can have a larger team, which is, you know, could be, hundreds, and then you could have, you know, a squad, you know, on missions, taking on a particular role, you know, kind of thing. So, So, you know, around the galaxy. So kind of, maybe we even have things where we have different superheroes stationed in different places, you know, that kind of thing, whatever it is. But, you know, again, we haven't designed all that yet. So we're a little bit bottoms up right now, and that we sort of know some details and we sort of don't. So, all right. And again, you know, you want 2 to 4 or 5 of these points here, and so it's so unique character classes. Again, I don't know 100% whether these are all going to make it, right? These are just kind of like, okay, as I'm thinking through what is these things going to be, you know, So some of this is kind of stating the obvious again, and again, in really elegant design, I want to try to like reduce that down, as much as possible. Let's see, I think that was 20. Oops. All right. So you guys are hopefully getting the idea. And again, what I would normally be doing is coming back down here and looking through my brainstorming, and that kind of stuff, and kind of going like, okay, well, how else do we want to do, what else do we want to use in my superheroes, that kind of stuff. But again, not every feature needs to do that. Like we talk here about, how is the superhero vulnerable? That's not necessarily a key selling point or a pillar. That's just a feature. Like, every unit in the game needs to have a weakness. It needs to have that kind of stuff. And so that's not necessarily like something sexy enough to be there that's there. Again, this is a feature of the superheroes, but isn't necessarily something that you would list in a pillar, right? So, and then let's see here. And you can sometimes even just put a note. You might take this out later. Okay, so I'm just putting kind of a note in there, and again, just kind of, if you want to color it something different or whatever, sometimes, just to kind of make a note. I would cut that out of the final version, but it's just a way, it's a way for me to kind of remember that, like, one of the reasons I'm doing 4 characters at a time is because I have the idea that this could be co-op. So kind of keep that in mind, that that's part of the reason that is, is existing there. Alrighty. So technology, let's see. So again, we'll call it this for now. Again, this is all kind of, work in progress, but showing, so again, some of these things, may be redundant. Some of these things may be, again, this advanced weapons, is a little bit different. So I imagine, like in this particular case, saying battle suits, that would be more like Tony Stark and Iron Man. Vehicles would be like tanks and stuff like that, or aircraft. And you could even sort of make a note of like. So these are slightly different, even though they're kind of in the same category. But I'm specifically calling out mechs because I think they would be really fun and cool to do. And so again, just trying to kind of show that we're using superhero powers and magic, so to speak. Being really kind of what a lot of superhero powers are, and that technology is going to exist that's either going to augment and create superheroes like Iron Man, Batman kind of superheroes, or we're going to have again giant mechs and things like that can also be super powerful, and we're going to try and kind of create this duality of compare and contrast of these superhero magical sort of abilities with technology, and kind of show how these things are clashing together. But I think do it at a scale that hasn't been done before, and so that's in my mind. Again, we've seen mechs and giant things in other superhero shows, so it's not 100% unique, but I think we can hopefully find a unique slant to it. All right. So, and again, I'm just doing a couple in each one of these because I don't want to bog us down on detailing each one of these. I'm just kind of showing you how it is. And again, you might have 2 supporting points, you might have 4 or 5, but I'm just kind of showing you how I'm thinking about building out the core pillars, right? And how they're kind of how I go about doing it. Oops. Now this was unique. Oops. Let's see here. All right. So we had talked about this concept of massive battles. I think Jonathan, I believe, was the one that kind of got me going on this path a little bit with his drawing like now Warren Blade or Warband. What was it again, Jonathan? The game you had mentioned. And even though it was a fantasy game and stuff, I liked this idea that you would come down onto a battlefield, and again you would be fighting, and see fairly large battles kind of in front of you, that you would be battling, against those guys, on the battlefield. And so that was something that that I thought was pretty exciting or pretty fun to do. I don't shoot. Oh, that's okay. Mountain Blade, yeah, Warband. So I was just trying to remember what that one was. So for those of you that weren't with us, it has some interesting stuff, even though it kind of is a little bit different conceptually. I like the fact that so Bannerlords is the same series, I believe, right? That's part. It's like the sequel or whatever of the Mountain Blade. So the that series, the idea behind it, what I liked, at least what inspired me, was this idea that you go down to these battlefields and have these kind of like action-y sort of large-scale battles. Now, I talked about one of the things that is risky here, and I'm not going to worry about technology, and limitations, in the scope of this discussion, but just to kind of make you guys aware of, the difference of like having, let's say you have 4 just to step back, take a bit of a side note on this for a minute, and the way to think about this. So one of the reasons, if we think about this whole point right here, so one of the reasons for doing this is for balance, and the way and the reason that this works really well is that that if the player character always has 4 characters. So if we know that in every single mission and whatever, the player doesn't go into it unless he has 4 slots filled, right? Then we know that he always has 4, doesn't have 5, and maybe we offer some mercenaries and some other stuff later, but for the most part, we know like, okay, there's 4 slots. He's always going to have 4 powerful superheroes. Now, one of the things that allows us to do is sort of know, okay, there's 4 superheroes. We know from a performance standpoint that, there are X number of polygons each, there are X number of complexity each. So we know like what those things are, as far as bogging down the system. Now, the next thing to think about is like, okay, if I have these 4 superheroes, how many guys can they fight, right? Like, especially because they're superheroes. And so if they're just fighting other superheroes, then is a battle going to be just 4 on 4? Is it 4 bad guys and 4 big guys? Is that what a battle is, right? Or what are other types of battles that might exist? And how do you level that playing field? And so this can be a challenge for some games where you want to create these guys that feel really powerful, but that means that there has to be a lot of weak guys, that add up to sort of being, the same strength. So the player ultimately kind of gets overwhelmed by minions or more people at one time. And so if I know I have 4 superheroes, then I might say like, okay, well, then I know the enemies could have, we'll just call it 20 right now, just as but I don't know if that's true, but again, we got to start somewhere. But we might say that like, okay, they're going to have roughly 20 characters on screen and whatever. So then we know at any one time in a battle, we'll call it, that there's going to be potential for, let's just call it 25, units and characters all working simultaneously. And so I have to have enough memory and enough bandwidth to make sure that those 25 guys are always on screen. And that's a standard fight. That's just my 4 versus the 20 or so enemies, and that would be a fair fight, right? Now, maybe again, if it's superheroes, it might be 4 on 4. But if it's, you have to determine, well, how many superhero fights am I going to have versus, if I'm fighting mundanes that have technology and stuff. Now, a larger unit, like we'll call it a boss, semi-boss, or a giant mech, or something like that, might take the place of, say, 4 characters because it's super powerful, and so you can do things to say like, okay, well, if they have 1 mech, then, they might have, if the enemies have 1 mech that's worth 4 of their guys, and then they only have 16 other guys. So they got 1 mech, who's worth kind of 4 points. So often what I'll do is assign kind of a point system, and that point system is a somewhat arbitrary, although it's a calculated complexity of what that unit is, and it could also kind of have to do with like how powerful they are or whatever. But for right now, it's really this is about memory and footprint and stuff, just to know like, okay, what is this thing? So I don't bog the game down below 60 frames per second. How do I keep it playable, right? So I know that there's always 4 player characters and 20 points worth of enemy characters. And again, that could be a mech that's worth 4 points with 16 guys that are 1 point each. I might have some like super heavy guys that are like, let's call them tanks. And those tanks might be worth 2 points. So I have, a mech worth 4, a tank worth 2, that's 6 points. And then I have 14 points of other guys, however you do that math, but the game engine would know, and you as a game designer would know to never spawn more than 20 points of things on screen at any one time. And so therefore you're going to balance your battles, right? So you can kind of do, similar things, but that becomes a much easier scenario to understand than if the player character could have 1, 2, 3, or 4 characters, and he's going to go into this battle. Then, like, how do you balance that? Because you're like, okay, well, if the player character is 1, and does that mean there's 5 guys against 1? And you could try to create a system that says, well, I'm going to create, for every player character, I spawn, let's just call it 5 points of enemy, and stuff. And so that might work, but you gotta be understanding, like, okay, why and what are we doing there, right? And so that's the reason we're kind of doing some of that. And lastly, real quick on the squad thing, one of the reasons why I also chose 4, that was not an arbitrary decision. First of all, in co-op, we quite often do 2 or 4 player co-op. And so more often than not, you see 4 player co-op, and that's just a default number that kind of existed in our game world for a variety of technology reasons, that 4 felt like a good number to use. But in all honesty, that number actually had some other meanings behind it. And so if you think about, especially in the world of console games, and I've got my controller here especially, but it also could be, here on my keyboard, you notice that I have my little arrow keys, right? And there's 4 directions in there. And that also maps to my D-pad here, which has 4 directions in it. And so one of the common things for controlling stuff, whether it is 4 players or the human player and 3 AIs or whatever it is that mapping those 4 characters to this D-pad is actually very logical, and it works really well. And so one of the systems that you could use for that is to know that each one of these directions is one of your characters in your squad, and you would even see on your screen the 4 icons in a plus shape that just tells them, like, hey, here's your 4 characters, and I can very quickly select one of those characters and do something with it, and I'm not going to detail out the control scheme for that, but the number 4 isn't totally arbitrary. There was some reason and logic to that. Now, you could do a 2-player game as well, but in this particular case, we're going to do 4. Now, granted, on a keyboard and mouse and things like that, you're probably going to pull up your mouse and go, okay, here's, my UI interface, and I'm just going to click on the portrait of one of those 4 characters and do it that way, and that's legitimate too, but we're attempting to design a game that's a little bit, that's more console friendly or could be played on a console, and so I'm trying to be thinking about things that are more console friendly. So just to understand, that's why the squads is important to understand. Now, let's take that a little bit farther, and I'm not going to devolve into trying to design this whole system, but you can see now that by default in a standard battle, I need at least 20 guys, or I would have, those 20 points of characters. And again, I would design this whole, so then from a art perspective or technology perspective, each character is a certain amount of complexity, has a certain amount of polygons, textures, animations, skeletal meshes, AI, everything else that goes with a character, all the gameplay, weapons, everything else that's there that needs to be in memory all the time, that needs to be, fast and easy. They might have dialogue. They might have all sorts of stuff that could go into what is a character, and why is that character, what makes up that character, right? So when we're thinking about these massive battles, and if we've already designed this game system to have 25 characters on one screen, that might be massive battle enough. That might be something that we're like, okay, there's going to be, always kind of these larger fights. But do we want to go bigger, right? And what happens if we want to go bigger? And what, and how does that happen? So there's two factors in going bigger. And that's why, again, massive battles might be something we cut, because again, if we're assuming kind of indirectly that we need to have these 20 or so enemy points allocated, again, roughly for big battles, but not necessarily massive battles. I'd say that 25 people on screen is maybe a big battle. And again, keep in mind that, again, that could be a 4-on-4, if it's 4 groups of superheroes. It doesn't mean, but a superhero might be worth 5 points of complexity. And the way, again, you would kind of arbitrarily do that is to say, well, how complex is that character from a technical standpoint? How, again, what's the memory it uses, the animations, the skills, abilities, how much does it take in memory? And so another superhero might be something that is way more complicated and versus a more generic, soldier or something like that. And so therefore it's worth a lot more points because of just the complexity of what it can do. That's one way to kind of think about it. This isn't necessarily about balance. This is really a technology problem that we're kind of addressing through a game design, if that makes sense. So hopefully everybody's awake and following me. You guys are quiet today, but again, please chime in, if you've got questions, and hopefully there's you're understanding the method of my madness, or this is helping you, today. So if we start going bigger than that, what happens? Right? So now let's just say we need to have a battle of 50 people in it. Now we could do that in a couple ways. We could have waves of enemies, and if you don't know, waves of enemies were kind of designed, way back when, because for several reasons. One, waves of enemies were done so that we didn't overwhelm the player with too much at once. So the player has, a certain amount of ammunition, skills, abilities, healing, health, all these kinds of things, and so if the game balance is such that, let's just say I have one superhero can take on 5 guys roughly. If I throw 50 guys at you, you're probably dead, right? You probably don't have enough, whatever it is, to take on 50 guys. We've designed and balanced the game for you to take on 5, and then maybe 10, if you're really good, right? But if you take on 50, you're going to be dead. You just can't take on that many guys all at once. So and then the second thing was a technical problem of, again, memory footprint, and all the other problems and complexities of just how complex a character is. And so, one, we don't want to overwhelm the player. 2, we don't want to have, 100 characters on screen because, our game system, the game engine just wouldn't support that, and now that's changing and getting better. And again, the Mountain Blade series and some others have shown that you can do kind of these larger scale, massive battles. And that's requiring streaming technology, and that's a whole kind of different set of technology than not. That's kind of complicated technology, but let's assume for now we have it. So, in a massive battle, you also don't want to have the player characters here and then 100 guys all around you, all necessarily coming in simultaneously. You'll see that even sometimes in movies, especially all the martial arts. Think about some the old Bruce Lee movies or something, and these ring of guys surround Bruce Lee, and he's whoa, and then one or two guys attack him, and he takes those 2 guys out, and the next guy attacks from behind, and he takes that guy out, and then somebody else attacks here and here, and he takes those 2 guys out, right? And very rarely do you ever see all 50 guys go, simultaneously, because even that would overwhelm Bruce Lee, right? And so they make it feel like he's taking on these massive fights, but in reality, he's taking them on 2, 3, 4 at a time, just enough that he can physically do that. And then it's more like a gauntlet battle of do I have enough strength and stamina to just keep it going and keep going for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, as just keep fighting wave after wave after wave of all these guys, right? So that's kind of what we're trying to do here. But part of what we can do in these massive battles is that we're kind of creating, or we can be creating kind of a large battlefield. And so if you think about if you guys have seen the last Avengers movie even, which I recently just watched again, they have that big massive battle at the end, and I believe Thanos has all of his minions, and they're coming in, and the Avengers they've already got their butt kicked pretty badly. They're already hurting pretty bad, and they're thinking the end is there because it was whatever number of guys, and they were pretty overwhelmed as it was. And then the rest of the guys, suddenly the Thanos army shows up, and they're all right, well, here we go. This is the last stand, and we're toast. And then suddenly, all those portals, whatever they were, I think they call them the Time Lords or whatever. The Doctor Strange, it was Doctor Strange, his minions, and then some people had their own portals or whatever. Then suddenly behind the Avengers, all these things open up, and then suddenly thousands of Black Panther and all these other people show up with their armies, and suddenly it's even or ish, right? Now the big massive battle happens. And so the point of that is that battle's happening organically, meaning that there's lots. If you break down a big, massive battle, right? It's not that this one guy is taking on 1,000 people. Like any big, whether it's medieval battle or whatever, right? It's a lot of like 1-on-1s, 2-on-1s, maybe 3-on-1s, that are happening, and there's 100 of those things going on all over the place. And then as soon as this guy kills this guy, they turn around and stab somebody else in the back, and it's a bunch of these very small battles taking place over the course of a much larger battle. And so it's not necessarily that all these guys are going against the superheroes simultaneously, but they are, this battle is happening, right? So, sorry, I'm getting down a bit of a rabbit hole here, and I'm going to stop. But I wanted you guys to kind of understand that the massive battles is a huge change in technology, because suddenly now, if I have to have 100 even guys on screen, that's very different than having 25 guys on screen. And so now, in theory, if those 25 guys were going to max out my memory and max out, my performance, and now I have to have 100, well, now each of those 25 guys, the complexity that they were, I'm just going to go rough here, but they're going to be about 25% of their complexity. If I want to have, 25 guys at 100%, then if I want to have 100 guys at 100%, then those 25 guys each need to drop to 25% of their total complexity. So if they were, use a round number, if they were 100 megabytes of RAM, each, then, on the small battles, then now they would need to be 25 megs each, in order to have 4 times more of them, right? Or whatever that is. Hopefully you guys understand that math and that logic. And so I'm just trying to kind of, again, get you to be thinking about how are you designing these things and understanding that there is technical limitations. And as a designer, we can't always just work in a vacuum. We have to sort of understand a little bit about technology. We don't have to be programmers, whatever, but we have to know that things cost, right? Every asset that's in the game usually has a cost. Every asset takes memory, takes, RAM, CPU, performance, and that comes from not just the base art model, but the AI and everything else that it goes in it, has a total cost of that particular character. And our gaming consoles especially, and all that are limited, and they're getting better every year, and these concerns are getting less and less at some levels, but you can also see the complexity of characters especially are getting exponentially like higher every year, and the quality of the models and all that is getting a lot higher. And so it's becoming a very expensive problem, because the more, the better looking, and the better looking, and the better they move, and all the better and smarter AIs they have, like all that stuff's performance. So it's the same problem, just scaled to a whole nother level, which takes us 10 times longer, in comparison to what it did 10 years ago. But it's still the same thing. We always want to use kind of 100% of what we have. We just have to break that down and figure out, what gets what, right? We have to do that. So that's kind of what these memory maps are about. So massive battles. So let's see. So fight huge battles. I know this is assortment of okay, so I'm trying just to kind of, again, outline roughly what those things are with a few points of what those are going to be. I am not going to define the kaiju. I don't know if you guys know the term kaiju. It's kind of, I believe it was coined in the Godzilla universe, and I believe it's more of a Japanese name that relates to a big, giant, massive creature like Godzilla. So what I'm referencing here, what I'm kind of trying to reference here is that when we talk about massive battles, yes, so Pacific Rim also used the same term. So I believe kaiju actually is a generic term that's globally accessible, and I believe it just comes from a Japanese word, the Japanese word kaiju. So I think it's used, but just if you didn't know, or if you've never heard that term before, that's generally the reference. If you watch Godzilla or Ultraman or any of the like Japanese stuff and stuff. Yes, Jonathan, that's where exactly the giant mechs that I'm talking about and stuff would be the Pacific Rim, kinds of things. That's, maybe they're Mech Warrior or from the Mech universe there, or maybe they're Gundams, or maybe they're, Pacific Rim. But yes, I like conceptually having those Pacific Rim style mechs, and those could be on the player side, and those could be on the on the enemy side, right? And I see those as a way of, in the same logic of Pacific Rim, right? The Pacific Rim, they had giant kaiju that came from underwater, from deep in the. I'm trying to remember now. It wasn't deep in the earth. They actually were coming from another universe, if I remember right. But I believe they were coming through like fissures in the earth or whatever, because they were coming from underwater there. But regardless of the story, these big giant Godzilla things show up and are wreaking havoc. And the only way, our normal tanks and missiles and our terrestrial weapons were not very effective, right? And so we built massive walls that kind of, I guess, supposed to have stopped them. And then, what humanity did in that particular case was we built the mechs, yeah, there was a wormhole or something I remember down there. I think Pacific Rim 2, I think the sequel went down. I think they went into the other universe, or they sent a bomb in there or something. I have to go back and rewatch those, but they explained that rift, I remember, a little bit more in I think the sequel. All right. So anyway, so the idea of these giant creatures. Now again, I'm not against those even being on the player side, and things. And so we haven't defined our superheroes just right. And so and so maybe we've got a superhero that can transform, and they can go from and whether that's technology or whether that is something else. I don't know if you guys might be, more of my era, and also, I was really into Japanese, stuff when I was a kid, and so, which was at the time not all that common or popular. It was very hard to find here in the States, especially. So I grew up I had all the posters of Ultraman and stuff all over my walls growing up, and all the Ultraman monsters. I got a hold of this, in Japan, I got a hold of this whole poster set that was very cool. That had all the, every character and every kaiju from the Ultraman universe. And I remember growing up watching Ultraman when it was on TV and stuff. But again, not a lot common in the U.S. I don't know if any of you guys ever watched Ultraman or familiar. They're bringing it back now. I believe there was a Netflix Ultraman show last year, and the Ultraman franchise is starting to come back. But in the Ultraman universe, they actually have this device where the humans, I don't know, it's like the equivalent of this little baton kind of thing, and and the guys in it are just like normal humans, and then when they want to transform into the Ultraman, they put it up, and there's this whole thing, and they press the button, and then they go and then they grow up and turn into the Ultraman, character, and they morph into this giant, thing that was kind of cool, and then they could go fight the kaiju, and then but they had a limited amount of power that they could, energy that they could use to fight. So there was always this like time pressure of like they have to like take out the kaiju, in the energy they have, kind of thing. Makes for almost a good video game, in some regards, right? So you transform into your creature, your character, whatever that thing is. Even think of it as like, Ant-Man, in the movies, transforms occasionally. He reverses and goes, instead of going really small, he transforms into that big giant guy. But then I forget what it was. He doesn't get enough oxygen or something. He always has trouble when he's big, or he has a limited amount of stuff when he's big. So again, there could be ways of balancing a game like that. But so I'm not against considering that we've got something that allows a superhero to summon or transform into or create their own kaijus, their own massive guys. We can figure that out. So what I'm talking about this, I'll just kind of make a note, is that this is so lots of units and all right, so let's see. All right, so what I'm kind of just saying there, the word massive, is referring both to quantity and size, and so just making a note there. I can make another note of so again, these notes are things that I wouldn't, when I go in and create the final list of my pillars, I would not be in there I wouldn't leave these notes in, but these are more to reference myself for later, for my own understanding, and then ultimately become something that I would design there. But and then let's see here. I'm trying to think of. So let's go down to the bookmark here. All right. So this particular all right, so inspired by Mount Blade War Banner. So just to keep a note there. So right now, this doesn't let's say give me any more ideas, as far as like that as a note here. And so this is something we haven't fully defined yet. And so kind of so I'm going to put just a random idea down here that I had for another game. And I don't know if this idea of the massive battles works here now, but let me write it down, and I'll kind of explain it really quick. Excuse me, I'm thinking. My thinking how do I word this? So sometimes I'm thinking through this. So so what I want to say is not well written, but I'll explain this. And I don't know. I don't know if this makes sense or not in this particular case. So I might have mentioned this in the beginning of this talk. I can't remember. I know I've mentioned this a few times in my lectures and stuff. But I'll give a really, really quick example of this just to kind of, show how I was thinking of this on a previous design problem, and part of why I'm also want to give this example instead of skipping over it is I want to show you that ideas often don't go away. And this is why I write everything down, and why I've got literally 25 years of notes and ideas and design documents and brainstorming documents and everything else you can imagine. I mean, I've got, probably 10 terabytes worth on my hard drives of just things that I've written and created and thousands of documents. And so this comes from, this idea originated, let's see, this would have been 2000, around 2000, year 2000, 2001. Working at Microsoft and working on a franchise called Age of Empires, which a few of you might have played, the Age of Empires, Age 2, Age 3, Age of Mythology games, which I worked on. And so so those were real-time strategy games. And as a franchise, and as a RTS franchise, it was, I don't know if it was the biggest, but it was at the time arguably one of at least the top three, with Command & Conquer, CNC, the Command & Conquer CNC universe, StarCraft, and Age really being the three at that time big 900-pound gorilla like dominance back in that genre at the time. And I was working on Age of Empires, but we realized as a franchise that we were kind of doing a lot with it, and the RTS genre was kind of, it's always a roller coaster with RTSs. They come and go in popularity, and so we recognized that we were milking it quite a bit. Age 2 was a phenomenal product. It still is. I mean, the definitive new edition that they recently re-released, still spectacular. It's still like just an amazing product. And so, but we also recognize that, there's only so much room in the market, so much things. It was a big cash cow. So what do we do with it? So I was assigned to create a new game in a new genre, using the Age of Empires franchise. And so I came up with an idea of, at the time, Diablo 2 had just come out. That was one of the biggest games, and so I had this idea of how to create an Age of Empires action RPG that was kind of taking Diablo and kind of making it historical, which, Diablo was fantastical, but, but that also gave it some advantages, being a fantasy game versus a realistic, historically accurate-ish kind of game that Age was, it was a little bit challenging to make Age as exciting or as cool because I'm not casting magic spells and things like that. So that was one disadvantage we were going to have if we just did a direct competitor to it. But one of the flaws that I identified in Diablo 2 in the Diablo universe gameplay and that action RPG stuff is a looter game. You know, those games are basically about going through dungeons, collecting as much loot as possible, you know, and then whether you finish that dungeon or you go back to the next dungeon, whatever, you're constantly collecting a bunch of stuff, filling up your inventory, going back, selling it, using some of it if it's better, you know, making money, going back and rinse, recycle, repeat. You're doing that 10,000 times in the game, but you reach this point, for me, maybe 25% of the way through the game. It could be 50% of the way through the game for some people, where I had so much money and was so powerful that I kind of, that progression of like, oh, there's always something a little bit better, a little bit more, and you want to keep playing because you want to see, like, what else can I collect? And I might be a level 8 character, but I get a sword that's level 10, and I love it, so I'm like, I want to play so I can level up to level 10, so I can get that sword, and there's this whole progression there, but in the end, you kind of lose interest because you just stop caring, because you've got so powerful, you're like, you're dead, you're dead, you're dead, you're dead. You know, I'm God right now, and you just, like, the fights aren't even a challenge. You barely lose. You barely even take damage. You can buy whatever you want to buy. And so that loop progression became boring to me. And so I had this idea of, why can't I build an army? And so you could do the Diablo progression exactly as is, where you could collect all that stuff, bring it back, sell it, just get some money, you know, use it for yourself, and you could do that exactly as is. But then I imagine that, you know, those games are these hub and spoke games, right? So you start off with you're in a town, you go out from those things, you do all of your stuff, and then eventually you progress to the next, you know, to the next hub, and you do that 4 or 5 times, you know, through the game. And that's the way Diablo is kind of structured in its quests and its dungeons. And so, but again, I lose meaning for myself when it's just always about only me as my player character. So I had this idea of, within each town, you'd have this, like, whatever it is, you know, you got a castle there, you got a recruiting area, you got a training field, and it starts off and there's literally, like, nobody there but, like, an arms master, and he says, you know, bring me some stuff and I'll build you an army, you know. And so now I could go out and basically collect a bunch of stuff, you know, collect all my loot, collect all my gear, and collect all those things, and then I could come back and either sell it myself and use it and take the money and use it, or if I brought it to that guy, if I brought him a sword, you know, a shield, and a suit of armor, he would then create a swordsman. If I brought him a pike, you know, and a suit of armor, he would create a pikesman. You know, if I brought him, you know, whatever it was, I could control the configuration of my army, you know, by the equipment that I chose to bring him. And, you know, and then I could buy things like horses and other stuff to create cavalrymen, you know, and whatever those things were. And so I was basically creating this whole mechanism where I'm actually trying to outfit my whole army and myself. And so suddenly all this loot collection, all these item collections there. And so then what you'd see is this army slowly training. All I had to do was bring them the gear and equipment, and then he was just going to automate. You know, you could make it more elaborate, and you get to recruit the guys yourself too. But in this particular case, he was just going to build this big army, and then when the army got big enough, what you're having to do is you have to go take the next city, like the next, you know, the bad guy has a fortress, and, you know, he's got an army of 100 guys, you know, so now I've got to build an army of 100 or 150 or whatever I think, you know, to the maximum that's going to be for that battle. Then I'd go into a whole other game that would be kind of like more of an Age of Empires game, where I would then have these big massive battles, and I could fight my army versus his army, and if I beat him, then I now take control of that next hub, and now my whole, everything shifts to the next hub, and now I do it again, but at a bigger scale, and then again at a bigger scale, and so on. So I do that like 5 times through the game, you know, there. And so there was always this like bigger enemy army. So there's like 4 sub bosses, the main big boss at the end. And I might have to have 500 guys when I go to that, right? But I'm that I'm building up, and then, the weapons are getting better, and maybe eventually I'm getting guns, and eventually I'm getting, other things, and, and so I can build these bigger and bigger armies that are better, but again, it gave me a reason for why I'm collecting all this loot and, and stuff. So, I'm not 100% sure that totally fits within this, but I like the concept of it because it gives more meaning to what and how the players want to collect this loot and this gear. And so that's sort of what I imagine this kind of building a big army, was, in that maybe it is something where I am trying to put together, this might fit back into teams here, and that we're building, our superhero teams, but now maybe this also is, maybe we need to build, and I'm throwing it here for now. Now this might want to go under massive battles. I don't know. I'm just kind of putting this in here as a note. And again, this is kind of a brainstorming army. So I'm kind of thinking that, then again, this may not fit under teams, maybe this is more under the massive battles, in fact, let's put it under massive battles for now. Again, this is just kind of, I'm thinking as I'm going. Oh, I guess I already called it massive battles. Let's see here. I don't know. Maybe this is just a sub point for now. I have to think about that one. Again, these are just kind of, the iteration of what I'm going through, right? This kind of thinking is very, 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 very iterative, right? And so we may not necessarily know where to put it. So let's see. So maybe it is more like this. Now, so again, like in Age of Empires, that in that particular example that I gave, that could have been, again, I was foreseeing like 5 of these things, happening in the game, but it's a very different technology stack, and I even kind of imagined it sort of being its own little, like game engine or its own thing, and it would just be its own mode, and it'd be very different. So whether it's like that or whether these massive battles are taking place more often or not, is something we kind of got to think about, right? And so, so it could be the kind of thing where, I mean, even think about like, and I'm just, again, brainstorming here. So, what this might also be, so what this is, a similar idea that, but instead of me, so make a note here, like, all right, so this is, this could be a similar type of battle, but, this might be the equivalent of like the U.S. Army, or whatever. Think about like even the Batman. I guess Batman's not the best example because Batman was more the Gotham would put up the bat signal. Batman would show up and he'd help, but it wasn't like an army, something like that. I'm trying to think of an example where two existing armies are going to battle and they're coming like this, and then the U.S. military or whatever that group is, that you decide, there's the good guys versus the bad guys, to simplify it. These guys are going to go clash with each other, and so that right at the last minute they're like, help, we're in trouble, and the good guys are like, please help us. And so you and your team, your 4 superheroes fly in, and now you're going to go fight this battle with them. So you could have a big, massive battle without having to build an army yourself, kind of thing. But I do kind of, again, like this idea of, maybe you're building, your superhero team, but maybe you're also building, again, this army, that, again, would at some point be able to use, in these massive battles. And so that army could be, so the Avengers in-game style. So I like the sense of scale. I like the sense of like things. So that there's 2 sizes. Jonathan, the Wakanda soldiers would be a good example of that, right? So yes, but whether it's just, imagine like even Wakanda getting into a big fight with one of its rivals or whatever, right? And they're just on the battlefield, and then the Black Panther makes a phone call and is just like, hey Avengers, like I need some help over here, right? So the Avengers fly in, and now the Avengers just join in. I guess they did have that big fight. In the Black Panther movie, Wakanda did have that big fight there at the end of the movie for the city, and stuff. So that would be a perfect example of where the Black Panther could call in a favor, and bring in the supporting army. So I don't know. Again, this feature has some technical risks. It has some design risks. It has some other things. But again, it's big. It's innovative. It's a little scary. But for now, I'm not limiting myself in this. But this would definitely be from my experience, like something I need to run by the rest of the team and go like, okay, guys, am I just completely going crazy here? Is this way too hard? But again, this is just ways of using, and what I'm trying to show here is that we're reusing and using a bunch of the same technologies, meaning that building this army and supporting an existing army aren't all that different. And so that's there. And what I'm ultimately trying to build in is the sense that the world's a bigger place, the universe is a bigger place, than just myself. And so that the superheroes are doing more, than just like trying to save Gotham City. They're doing more or whatever, right? That they're, a lot of times our superheroes are, we're taking place in Smallville or in Gotham or Metropolis or, whatever city that is at the time. And we're just kind of trying to save that one city. That's typically, what a lot of superheroes do, and things, but, and I like the idea again of building out the Justice League or building out the Avengers or building out, our superhero squad. But that only, again, is it's been done and it's there. And so this is, at least as a first idea, I would need to flesh this out in a much bigger way. But I like this idea of building out these massive battles, and having them at a scale where I really would feel like, I built this. But I think this build your own army kind of idea could relate to, for example, to really, really quickly, like, on your spaceship, in what you're about to get to on your base, right? You got a hangar bay and you set up, you build out a hangar bay and that lets you put in, a bunch of spaceships, and then you put in a mech bay and that lets you get some mechs, and then you put in, your superhero, whatever, you got your luxury, suites that, where the superheroes get to stay, and you got some other suites where they're like wannabe superheroes, and the sidekicks stay. And then, you're putting all these things that have a certain capacity, right? So you're making difficult choices. Your base has a certain number, and we'll transition this into bases. Your base has a certain number of slots, and, and it's kind of like Fallout Shelter or something where you got a side view of your base and so many slots and the, of course, cost and everything else and resources, but you make the best choice of what you want to build. And then some of those things could be literally like, we'll call it barracks, right? And so now a barracks might hold 100 troops, or whatever it is, and so I could choose, like, do I want to have a barracks that holds 100 troops, or do I want to have a superhero suites or whatever, and that maybe it's a 4-room, that one space could hold like 4 superheroes or 100 mundane troops or whatever, or 2 mechs or 3 fighter jets or 6 tanks or whatever it is, right? And so there's different things, that basically there's, each of these is slots, right? That we can then fill and upgrade and stuff. And so that's kind of where I'm going at this, and transitioning this idea into our base. And so, yeah. So mission support, so I like the idea of, my base being something that's always kind of there, it's always with us. And so therefore it's something that is taking an active role, in not just, it's part of our metagame. It's part of our bigger thing. It becomes something that we're upgrading and all that, but it also kind of gates, how big, how much, how whatever, and so there's a lot of reasons for having it there. But, if you guys have played like XCOM 2, they had a pretty good like side view based structure I kind of like, or I also refer to like the Fallout Shelter game, which was on mobile, but I also again like kind of how they built it, just a bunch of rooms that are basically of different sizes, so you can have different sized rooms and you can put different things in there, and the player has to choose like, what do I want right now, right? And how do I support it? And then, you might have to have power, and you might have to have resources that the thing, is supporting, and different types of superheroes need different types of rooms, and stuff. So like a particular superhero might come from an alien planet, and he needs a special atmosphere or whatever. And so you have to build maybe certain categories of things in order to get certain types of heroes, so since we're running out of time, I'm not going to deep dive into this, but I wanted to just show you guys, we kind of wrapped up, the pillars today. And so just to kind of recap, what we did, we had some ideas last week about what the pillars were going to be. We basically kind of came up last week with what the kind of the pillars were. based on, our stuff, right? And now this week we went in and added the kind of the supporting things. Again, it's not fully fleshed out. Some of these might need more, and this is something you iterate on a lot. Like, this isn't something like, I wouldn't say this is finished at all. Like, this is something I'm going to keep coming back to. I'm going to keep iterating on it. I'm going to keep working on it, and throughout the course of the game. But this kind of just, I hope, shows you guys that, how I'm focusing on what's new, what's innovative. Again, I'm not, even though the superheroes are really important, I didn't try to get into like defining all the different types of superheroes and their different powers and their different abilities. And like, that's not what this is about. That's an assumption that's sort of like, like it has to be there, right? Those are features, and so, so we can kind of generalize it here, but we don't necessarily have to, do it now. Unique powers and some of this stuff, again, the reason I didn't flesh it out here yet is I want to think about it more, because I would say that this is almost a feature and that you just kind of have to have a lot of different superpowers that, in order for it to work. And so, like, how do I make sure that that's new and unique and special? I don't know if I can, but that's what I'm thinking about. So, anyways, that wraps up pillars. And so, while we could keep talking about this, forever, I hope that kind of gives you an idea about how, we took the superheroes, the teams, the technology, these massive battles, and these bases, and we kind of tied it all together, right? And we kind of, and through these, just, ultimately it's a couple pages, but again, in a very short, succinct thing, we could show somebody what this game is, very quickly now, and get them to understand like what this game is going to be and all that kind of stuff. And so through that, then people hopefully would very quickly go like, oh, okay, I get it. Like, that's kind of cool, right? And if nobody read anything else about the whole game, they should be able to read this and really understand what it is. Next week we'll add in I'll make a note here just to do the let's see, let's make this, let's do that as a heading 3. And so we will flesh this out, next week, into what are these in fonts? 18. I don't know if you guys can see this. I'm trying to keep things large so you can see them. So, that kind of thing. So, premium, so again, just we'll flesh that out a little bit more next week, but the point is just understanding, like, again, as part of this, like, core pillars, if they understand just really basic, stuff there about the game, and then read the pillars, they would understand 100% of the game. So anyways, we're over time right now, so want to thank you guys again, whoever's still awake and following me. I appreciate it. For those of you that are watching me later, I hope this has been insightful about just, again, how you kind of go about creating the pillars, how you get to kind of what's important. I know, Dylan, you were struggling with that this week, so hopefully this is helping you. And everybody else, thanks again. And next week we will probably dive into, again, now talking about kind of the core features and really, again, starting to break down like the whole game and kind of understanding how to outline. And we're going to kind of start breaking down the mile high view of the features of the game, so you guys can kind of understand like how to systemically start designing the whole game. So we're going to start deep diving a little bit into that a little bit next week, just to kind of get a better sense for that. So anyways, Audrey, how are you? Hope you're well, and thanks again, and have a good week yourself. And everybody, again, Jonathan, Big Glob, Dylan, Everybody was here again this week. Thanks for being my regulars and supporters. And Luke, good to see you as well. So again, hopefully this helped you guys get a little bit more better understanding of just what it's like to design a game and create these pillars. I know it's hard, but bear with it. And again, just keep at it. You just have to kind of keep practicing to kind of figure out how to get these pillars right. So, but it's really important to really focus on again. Now, if I have any other ideas, anything that doesn't fit here, you can be like, no, this doesn't work, right? And so we're trying to create a box to work in, a box to design, so that as we now move forward with the rest of our game design, that we limit ourselves. And that's a purposeful thing, because having no limits is actually a bad thing for a game designer. Trust me, it's not something you want. So be safe, everybody. Have a great week, and we will hopefully see you next time. One last bit of business. Remember to like and subscribe. Hit those buttons, and remember to follow us if you haven't. And I appreciate your support, and we'll see you all next week. So take care, everybody. Bye now.